All right, picture this. It's the late 90s, and Sony decides to build a massive, blockbuster RPG to go toe-to-toe with the biggest name in the business. They throw a huge budget at it, assemble a giant team, and guess what? It sells over 1 million copies. It was all set up to be the next big franchise, and then, poof, it just disappeared. So what on earth happened? So yeah, that's the big question we're going to dig into today. How does a game that did almost everything right, a certified hit, end up becoming one of the biggest what-if stories in all of gaming? It's a real mystery. Okay, so to really get what was going on, you gotta go back in time to the late 1990s. This was the absolute golden age for Japanese RPGs. And let's be honest, one name just dominated everything: Final Fantasy. Sony saw the ridiculous success of Final Fantasy VII on its own PlayStation console and thought, hey, we need one of those. They wanted their own flagship JRPG. And here's what's so interesting when you look at the timeline. This wasn't just some knee-jerk reaction to Final Fantasy VII's success. Sony's project, The Legend of Dragoon, actually started development a whole year before FF7 even hit the shelves. This thing was a serious, ambitious project right from the get-go. And when I say serious, I mean it. Sony really put their money where their mouth was. $16 million. I mean, for a PlayStation game back then, that budget was absolutely staggering. This wasn't just another title on the release schedule. This was a statement. Sony was swinging for the fences here. And you could see that money everywhere. The development team swelled from just a small group to over 100 people. The game itself was so enormous it had to be spread across 4 discs, the absolute physical limit for a PlayStation game. A big reason for that? Over 30 minutes of jaw-dropping CGI cutscenes. They even brought in serious talent, like director Yasuyuki Hasebe, who'd worked on the combat for classics like Super Mario RPG. The ambition was just completely off the charts. But you know, to really take on the king, you can't just be a copycat. You need a secret weapon, something to make you stand out. And for Legend of Dragoon, they found that special something in its combat. They built a system that was totally different from anything else out there. And what they came up with was the addition system. This was so cool. Instead of just picking attack from a menu and watching your character go, you had to be involved. A square would shrink onto a target, and you had to nail a button press at the perfect moment to keep your combo going. It basically turned every single fight into this tense little rhythm game. You couldn't just zone out during battles. And this system wasn't static either. It evolved right along with you. Just look at the main character, Dart. You start off with a simple 2-hit combo, right? But by the end of the game, if you put in the work, you're mastering these insane multi-hit chains, like the Blazing Dynamo, doing over 4 times your normal damage. It was deep, it was skill-based, and man, was it unique. But, you know, that kind of innovation, it had a downside. While tons of fans, myself included, absolutely loved how engaging it was, some critics just found it, well, repetitive. The timing could be really unforgiving. And after 20, 30, 40 hours, that constant demand for precision in every single random battle just wore some people down. It was a brilliant idea, but definitely a divisive one. Hey, just a quick pause here. If you're digging this deep dive into a forgotten classic, do me a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It seriously helps us bring you more explainers on gaming's hidden histories. All right, back to it. So Sony had this ambitious, innovative RPG locked and loaded. They were ready for launch. But here's the thing. It wasn't launching into a vacuum. Oh no. It was stepping onto one of the most crowded, most competitive battlefields in the history of the entire genre. I mean, just look at the timing here. The game launched in Japan, sandwiched right between 2 absolute juggernauts. You had Final Fantasy VIII, the follow-up to a game that was a global phenomenon, and Chrono Cross, the sequel to what many people consider one of the greatest games ever made. Legend of Dragoon wasn't just being judged on its own, it was being compared to absolute royalty from the moment it was born. And yeah, the sales numbers really paint the picture. Selling nearly 2 million copies worldwide is a huge win for a brand new game. Let's be perfectly clear, that is a hit. But when your whole goal is to be the Final Fantasy killer, and Final Fantasy is out there selling 10 million copies, well, the perception changes. It was a success, for sure, but it wasn't the knockout punch Sony was hoping for. Okay, so this is where we get to the real heart of the mystery, right? The game was a success. It made money, it got good reviews, it had a passionate fan base,
and a whole world ready for more stories. So why in the world did Sony just let it die?
And this is the kicker. Thanks to this quote from Shuhei Yoshida, who was a top exec at Sony back then, we know a sequel was actually in the works. It was in pre-production. So this isn't a case of a game just not getting a sequel. This is a case of a planned sequel being deliberately canceled. The question is, why? So why was it canceled? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was basically a perfect storm of bad timing and shifting priorities. The PlayStation 2 was on the horizon, and Sony's whole strategy was changing. They started pouring money into genres with bigger global appeal. Think games like Jak and Daxter or artistic gems like Ico. On top of that, the game actually underperformed in Japan, which for a JRPG back then was a major red flag. And finally, it just came out at the tail end of the PS1's life. By the time a sequel would have been ready, Sony's attention was already firmly on the next generation. But here's the thing, Sony might have moved on, but the fans? Oh, they absolutely did not. For them, the story was nowhere near over. The story absolutely did not end there. There was this incredibly dedicated, passionate community that just refused to let this game die. For decades, they kept its memory alive online, sharing their love for it, and eventually, they decided to take matters into their own hands. And all that passion led to something absolutely incredible, the Severed Chains Project. This is one of the most amazing fan efforts I've ever seen. A group of fans spent years, literally thousands of hours, reverse engineering the original game's code line by painstaking line just to create a native PC port. This isn't an emulator. They rebuilt the game from the ground up to run on modern computers. It's just, wow. And they didn't just stop at getting it to run. No way. They packed it with all the modern quality of life features we take for granted now. 4K resolution, 60 frames per second, skippable cutscenes, saving anywhere. I mean, they basically made the modern remaster that Sony never did. They preserved this classic for a whole new generation. And honestly, this one comment from a fan on Reddit it captures the whole spirit of the movement perfectly. It's not forgotten if you mention it enough times. That refusal to let the game just fade away is the single biggest reason we're all still talking about it today. Their passion is what brought it back. So all of this brings us back to the big question, the one everyone's been asking for years. After all this time, after all the fan devotion, is there any chance we could see an official return for the Dragoons? But let's be realistic for a second. The obstacles to an official return are, well, they're huge. We're talking about a franchise that's been collecting dust for over 20 years. The original fanbase is now a quarter-century older, and the cost to make a modern AAA RPG today makes that original $16 million budget look like pocket change. From a purely business standpoint, it's a massive, massive risk. And so that leaves us with this one final massive question. We're living in an era of remakes where almost nothing seems off the table. But is the undeniable passion of a dedicated fanbase, is their powerful nostalgia actually enough to convince a company like Sony to take a gamble and revive a legend they left behind so long ago? I'd love to know what you think. Drop a comment below and let's talk about it.